Welcome to another A Cup of Coffee in Dalat. Today I want to talk about Vietnam and the surveillance bogeyman. This is a relaxed chat for expats who like nuance, proportion, and their bullshit detectors fully charged. Before we start, who is this video actually for? Well, let me anchor this properly because that matters. This isn't a warning. It's not an expose or a granddad knows best piece. It's me, an expat, talking to other expats in English about a set of stories we all hear sooner or later when living in Vietnam. Think cafe conversation, not manifesto. Explanation, not provocation. Curiosity, not courage theatre. I'm not encouraging anyone to push boundaries, test limits, or say the quiet part out loud. As a psychologist, sociologist, a professional people watcher, and a writer of stories, I'm interested in understanding how fear stories form, spread, and persist, and whether they still match the world we're living in now. And yes, I will briefly mention Murray Hunter. There is, of course, the new kid on the block problem. I know I'm still the new kid on the block. 9 months here versus the 20 or more years some expats I know have lived and worked here, and it sounds like an open and shut case. Shut up, Hopkins, you have no idea what you're talking about. But experience cuts both ways. People who arrive later often bring updated mental models. Technology changes. Governance changes, surveillance changes. Stories, however, often stay frozen at the moment they were first learned. So, are you actually being watched? This is usually the first question that comes up, often quietly, often after someone leans in and lowers their voice. Short answer, probably not in the way you imagine. The cinematic version of surveillance, where someone is actively listening to your calls or reading your messages simply because you exist and are a foreigner, doesn't map well onto how states or bureaucracies actually function. States and bureaucracies are far less dramatic, far more boring, and far more selective than that. A better question is not, am I being watched? But what would make someone bother? Asking that tends to drain a surprising amount of anxiety out of the room. If they're not watching everyone, then why does the fear feel so real? Because fear doesn't require constant observation. It requires believable stories. You don't need to monitor everyone if everyone believes you could. One visible enforcement action and a story about it repeated often enough disciplines hundreds of people who were never involved. Everyone knows someone who has had a problem, or knows someone who knows someone, or heard it from an expat who's been here for over a decade, often much longer, and seems well connected. These stories deserve to be listened to, but they also mutate. Details get smoothed out, context gets lost, and the emotional charge increases as the story travels. Virality does the rest, carrying the same narrative down through the generations and across social connections. As Fox Mulder used to say, the truth is out there. The trick is working out which bits are truth and which bits are just a really good story. But then you could ask, doesn't long-term experience count for something? And of course it does. Living somewhere for a long time builds instincts and cultural fluency that newcomers simply don't have. At the same time, experience can freeze mental models in place. If someone's understanding of surveillance and governments was formed 10 or 15 years ago and never updated, it may not reflect how technology, bureaucracy, and enforcement actually work today. Surveillance in 2026 is a very different animal from surveillance in the early 2000s. Experience deserves respect, but not immunity from recalibration. So, haven't we seen this exact fear pattern before? Oh, we have, and not just in Vietnam. Australia, for example, my country, offers a neat example. For years, the coalition repeated the story that they were the better economic managers for Australia's economy and that Labor would wreck the economy. It was said so often it hardened into common sense. And then something unfortunate and inconvenient happened. The internet came along and made the underlying data easy to access, and the story quietly collapsed under its own weight. The mechanism is familiar. Repetition plus authority creates belief, even when the evidence is thin. That doesn't mean people were lying, it just means stories are sticky. So what is Vietnam actually trying to do? And this part benefits from calm language rather than drama. Vietnam, like every state in the world, is interested in stability and social order. That's not sinister. The Minister of Public Security, or the Ministry of Public Security, sits at the centre of that system, combining policing, cyber oversight and administrative enforcement. What matters is how intent translates into practice. Vietnam, like every country in the world, has finite budgets, finite staff and finite attention. So that means prioritisation. And most expats going about their ordinary lives are simply not high priority unless something changes the equation. So let's talk about bureaucracy, because this is the reality everyone seems to forget. And that's because bureaucracy doesn't make for exciting stories. Bureaucracy everywhere shares the same traits: underpaid staff, risk aversion, process over initiative, and a strong desire not to attract attention from supervisors. Most people inside of these bureaucracies aren't ideologues. They're employees trying to get through the day without causing problems, go home at night and earn enough to feed their family. They process what lands on their desk. They don't invent work. Silence is often the safest strategy for them. There's no incentive to monitor expats just in case. So why does the "they know everything" story persist? Because people often confuse the existence of power with its constant application. Cameras exist, therefore someone must be watching. Laws exist, therefore they must be applied universally. Technology capability exists, therefore it must be running non-stop. That's fear logic, not organisational logic. Security systems work by acting decisively when thresholds are crossed, not by monitoring everything all the time. Deterrence works because consequences are believable, not because every action is observed. Then what does surveillance actually look like in 2026? Less James Bond and more infrastructure is the answer. Modern surveillance operates at a level of platforms, networks, metadata and patterns. AI makes pattern recognition cheap, automated and frankly quite dull. No one is listening to your calls, but systems can notice if something becomes relevant or anomalous. That's precisely why constant, personalised monitoring of ordinary expats would be inefficient and unnecessary. You don't tail ants. You pay attention if the nest starts behaving oddly. So what do people outside of expat circles actually say? External assessments tend to be calmer than expat folklore. Vietnam is generally described as mid-tier but serious. Not omnipotent, not asleep, but competent and capable of targeted action when state interests are engaged. Public reporting consistently notes growing public security influence in economic and infrastructure domains, targeted cyber capability aligned with state interests, and information control enforced through platform pressure and selective punishment. So where does risk actually increase for expats? Risk rises with repetition, amplification, local relevance, and embarrassment of influential actors. Ordinary expat life, professional commentary, and English language writing with limited reach sits at the low end of the spectrum. Political mobilisation, Vietnamese language mass messaging, or become a coordination hub sit at a very different point entirely. The critical factor is not existence, but threshold. Attention is triggered, not ambient. So then, what does the Murray Hunter case actually show us? Murray Hunter didn't stumble into trouble by accident. He repeatedly posted about royalty, race and religion in a deeply conservative context where everyone and their dog knows about the topics that are sensitive. Foreign journalists are told by their employers and agencies and their governments not to post about the 3 Rs. Posting about the 3 Rs once would probably pass unnoticed. Repetition across platforms with growing visibility crosses a threshold. You can admire the principle behind Murray's actions and still acknowledge that it was strategically stupid. States rarely act because they're offended. They act when something becomes persistent, visible and destabilizing. So how do you not stuff yourself up in Vietnam as an expat? The advice here is boring, which is why it works. Don't confuse critique with crusade. Don't escalate conflicts publicly. Don't name people obsessively. Don't assume English equals invisibility. Don't become a node for outrage or coordination. Don't underestimate the importance of face. And don't go breaking the laws, especially the big ones around obviously very illegal activities. And perhaps most importantly, don't believe your own hype. If you ever believe yourself thinking or find yourself thinking, they need to hear this, that's usually a good moment to pause. So why am I comfortable publishing this? And this is where I talk to myself out loud. Yes, this video here steps slightly outside of my usual professional lane. It discusses surveillance and state power, but it does so descriptively using public domain material without naming leaders, calling for action or encouraging organisation. My blog posts, or in fact my business blog posts, critique leadership, communication, workplace culture and service standards. My psychology blog talks about mental health. My writing does not name political leadership, call for protest or challenge state legitimacy. It fits a category Vietnam tolerates. Expert commentary aimed at improvement, not resistance. It's aimed at fellow expats, not a Vietnamese mass audience. It explains systems and incentives rather than challenging legitimacy. If anything, it replaces paranoia with proportion, which tends to lower risk rather than increase it. The real risk isn't publication. It's escalation, amplification and misinterpretation, all of which are choices that can be avoided. So then the final question becomes, you say expats are under constant surveillance. How do you know for sure? And this is where it's worth ending this video. Just because you were told something by someone you trust or someone who is well connected doesn't mean they know for sure either. Virality often means stories spread down through the generations and across social connections until they feel unassailable. So it's always worth asking, are you being sensibly cautious or are you carrying a very convincing story that's never been properly checked? As always, this is only my view and your mileage may vary. Enjoy your life here because I think this place is paradise on earth.